Good morning, and welcome back to Tekken. I'm Keith B, and I'm here to take you through everything we know about Tekken 8 so far. At Tekken World Tour Finals, the Tekken community collectively obliterated our sleep schedules and tuned in at odd hours. That tournament started at 3 a.m. my time, by the way, and the stream lasted almost 15 hours on Saturday. But Harada and company rewarded us with a veritable smorgasbord of Tekken 8 news in the form of a 35-minute presentation, as well as a character reveal trailer for Nina Williams. They also stealth dropped a Kazuya gameplay trailer literally while I was recording this video, so hey, thanks for the B-roll, Harada. We learned more about the previously demonstrated heat system, and boy is there a lot to it. They also demonstrated chip damage, a recoverable health system, new combo extensions, and more. To be fair, we won't really know how the game plays until competitors have had a chance to try the alpha build of the game at the upcoming EVO Japan tournament, and even then the developers have indicated they may make changes based on player feedback. But that's the kind of thing boring people say, and I'm not boring, damn it. So I'm going to Sherlock Holmes some shit together and at least try to start to create a picture of what Tekken 8 might actually play like. You pretty much can't talk about Tekken 8 without talking about the heat system. Every character in Tekken 8 will have this heat gauge below the health bar. On a side note, something I always really liked about Rage is that it was essentially a meter, but we never needed an on-screen bar for it because it simply activated every time your health bar hits a certain amount. That always felt like a really elegant solution that fit the design philosophy of Tekken really well. But that's kind of out the window now, as there's a whole dang heat gauge below your health bar in Tekken 8. Activating heat gives you a sort of install super mode that allows access to a whole slew of unique mechanics such as dash cancels. I'll get into everything that changes in heat mode in just a minute. A lot of people have noted heat is not completely unlike game systems from 2D fighters like Street Fighter V or Guilty Gear Strive. In most contemporary 2D games though, you typically build meter by either doing damage to your opponent and or having damage dealt to you. To be clear, that's actually not how heat will work in Tekken 8. The heat gauge begins each round completely full, and you can activate heat anytime you want. This actually reminds me more of like Leroy's cane in Tekken 7, where he starts out with access to the cane and can use it anytime he wants, once per match. Now in the case of heat, it's usable once per round, which means unless someone is getting completely steamrolled, then we're most likely going to see both players using heat almost every single round. At first, I thought that this was kind of weird, but the more I think about it, the more I actually like this aspect of heat. We didn't really need another comeback mechanic since Rage is still in the game, and I think that building and managing a meter would just not fit the gameplay of Tekken at all. So, how do you activate heat? You can activate heat in one of two ways. You can manually input R1 anytime to use a heat burst. A heat burst activation has an automatic follow-up attack that you can also choose to cancel. This automatic follow-up allows you to do a bound-like combo extender a la Tekken 6. This seems super strong for combos since we'll be able to use both heat burst to bound and then a tailspin or Tekken 8's tailspin equivalent in the same combo. By the way, shout out to Lil Majin for pointing out that the Rage Art style screen freeze when you actually activate a heat burst. I'll link his extensive breakdown of the heat system in the description. This freeze is definitely going to give us more time to convert things like whiff punishes and like combo routes. Now, according to the developers, the heat burst follow attack is not a launcher and will be advantageous on both hit and block. Okay, so that's what they said, but shoutouts again to now OG Dragunov player and YouTube Tekken guru Tyler 2K, whose video on the heat system is great, and I will link that in the description as well. He actually did his homework, unlike me, and counted the frames in slow motion, and he realized that heat burst is actually 0 on block. Neutral. What? Okay, so anything the developers say at this point, I'm taking with a massive grain of salt, and I'll be basing my thoughts on what I can see in the game. I think neutral on block, by the way, is a pretty healthy thing. I don't really want people just like doing this move and then being mad plus in my face. Neutral on block means you can sidestep afterwards and, hop kick, all kind of different options there. Now, the other way to activate heat is by using a heat engager. About 5 moves or so per character are going to have this special heat engager property added to them. The ones that we were shown were Paul's iconic Death Fist and Forward 1+2, or the Hammer of the Gods. If you hit an opponent with a heat engager, then you may choose to activate heat. If you do so, your character is going to enter this canned dash animation and end up directly in front of the opponent at what the developers are calling overwhelming advantage. Now, last time they said we were at advantage, we were actually at neutral. This time, based on the recovery animation, it seems pretty clear the attacker is going to be at plus frames. How plus? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Either way you choose to activate heat, your character will then go into heat mode, where they have these particle effects of like steam coming off of them. The heat gauge starts to deplete, and while it lasts 10 seconds, the heat gauge timer stops depleting whenever you attack or if your opponent is on the ground. 10 seconds is a long time in a round of Tekken, and the ability to extend the heat gauge timer further means some characters will potentially be able to sustain heat for a substantial amount of the round. Now, in heat, all attacks do chip damage on block, and I'll talk more about chip damage a little later on. Each character also gains an install or a unique power-up that will alter their move properties in some way. This is quite similar to how max mode works for Geese in Tekken 7, but what's unique here is that each character will gain totally different abilities. Paul was shown to have like Fakumram style charge up guard breaks on some attacks, whereas Law was shown that heat powers up his new nunchuck moves. This is a really interesting mechanic, but it also has me slightly worried. Like, what if your character doesn't have a very good power-up in heat, and then some top-tier DLC guest character has a power-up that's just, like, ridiculous? Similar problems did happen in Tekken 7 with Akuma and Leroy and so on. But wait, there's more. When you're in heat mode, you also gain these chain link charges of what the developers are calling heat energy. Heat burst grants 1 charge, and using a heat engager grants 2. You can spend heat energy to utilize a couple of specific mechanics, similar to how Akuma, Eliza, and Geese can spend a barometer in Tekken 7. You can spend 1 heat energy to do a heat dash cancel after doing any heat engager on block or hit. On block, it's very similar to activating heat, where your character dashes forward at overwhelming advantage. On hit, your character sends the opponent flying and they dash in, able to do a full combo. So that's right, in heat mode, heat engagers become plus on block launchers. You can also utilize a heat dash cancel mid-combo as another form of extending combos. So you can potentially do a heat burst to get a Tekken 6 style bound, a heat dash cancel, and Tekken 8's tailspin equivalent all in one combo. You can also expend all remaining charges of heat to do a heat smash. The one heat smash we got to see was like a powered up version of Paul's Demo Man. Heat smashes look like they will more or less function like Tekken 7's rage drives, and in that case, it makes sense that the rage drive mechanic is absent from 8. From a combo perspective, I think spending heat energy is going to be really interesting because it seems very open-ended with multiple types of combo extenders. While the wall carry is going to be clearly increased by this, it seems like they're balancing that out with some different ideas. One, this arena stage that we're on in the demo is really big. Also, regular tailspins just don't seem to hit the opponent as far in Tekken 8 as they do in 7. I think this is kind of a good idea. Everybody likes landing and posting clips of cool combos, but the problem in 7 was that the damage and wall carry got downright nutty, and there were so many tiny ass stages that often it felt like you were just constantly mauling or getting mauled at the wall. So far, it seems like in Tekken 8, Namco's saying, okay, let's have longer combos, but let's balance them out so there are maybe more interactions in the open. And I think that's also key to their aggression theme. It seems like they want this game to be really interactive. The other side of this is what you can do with heat in the neutral. Let's just unpack for a moment what happens when you get hit with a heat engager by Paul Phoenix. Let's say Paul lands his forward 1+2.
Hammer of the Gods.
And does a heat dash cancel, pushing you back, dashing in your face, and he's got now
Overwhelming advantage.
Paul is now in heat mode though. He's got 2 charges of heat energy. So let's say you're gonna guess on a mid-low mix-up, and you're gonna guess mid. He does forward 1+2, so you've guessed right. You're gonna take chip damage, remember, because he's in heat, so he's doing chip damage, and he spends a charge of his heat energy to dash cancel again in your face. So let's say you guess mid again, and he does Death Fist, and you guess right, but you take more chip damage, and so that's also a heat engager, so he then cancels that for another heat dash cancel in your face. And so now you're in a third situation where you have to guess on a mix-up. After guessing correctly on 2 mix-ups and losing like maybe a quarter of your health bar, you're in another forced mix-up as a punishment for getting hit once. Keep in mind, at any point, Paul could have demo manned you or could have ducked, and then he's off to the races doing a Twitter clip combo on your asses. The ability to create 3 consecutive forced mix-ups in a Tekken game is certainly new. To me, this aspect of the heat system seems to go against some of the core fundamental aspects of Tekken and 3D fighting games that I personally enjoy. One thing that's unique about 3D games and is essential to Tekken's design is that both players always have a variety of options for any situation, and so the game becomes very open-ended and defined more so by player playstyles than character playstyles. It's all about reading your opponent's tendencies and understanding what they might choose from a slew of options in any given situation. Do they favor ducking or sidestepping or mashing, and when and why? Because good players don't always do the same thing. A match of Tekken becomes an exercise in unraveling the psychology of another human being, and to me, that's the beauty of the game. It's also a big part of why things like tier lists don't matter as much in Tekken versus like a 2D fighting game like Street Fighter. I think the potential combined effect of these heat dash cancel situations and maybe the potential imbalancing of heat power-ups could alter that in Tekken 8. It seems like there is a potential for the characters who best synergize with the heat system to really set themselves apart from the rest of the cast in terms of strength, and that's more like how tiers work in 2D games. However, it doesn't have to work this way. It all comes down to what defensive options are available in these plus-on-block heat situations, as well as how strong movement in Tekken 8 will be. Let me give you an example from Tekken 7. Leo has forward 4 into their box stance, which on block is +9, and Leo kind of has a canned mix-up in box stance. Now, depending on your character, you might be able to actually sidestep the mid option, even at -9. I actually like to do a sidestep into a low parry, which can avoid both the mid and the low option. But that doesn't completely shut down the mix-up, because Leo has a fast tracking high to shut down my go-to option. If the Leo starts using the high, it might be to my advantage to then duck and do a launch punish, but then that opens me up to getting hit by the mid. Maybe you're just really good at reading this particular mix-up, and then the Leo player could opt to cancel the stance into a crouch dash to change the timing into another mix-up situation, but that would leave the Leo player vulnerable to you pressing buttons, but they also have ways to counter-hit you for pressing buttons. This spiraling web of options and counter options happens at pretty much every interaction in Tekken. I think this depth is key to why the game is so addicting to so many players, and also why you can always kind of find a way to win even if you aren't using a top tier character. So if heat dash cancels work more like Leo's stance transition, then I think the game could actually just be awesome. What I would hate to see is forced rock, paper, scissors interactions 3 times in a row every round when someone uses heat. I think that buffing movement in Tekken 8 would also be beneficial towards keeping options available in response to how strong the heat system is shaping up to be. Speaking of movement, the developers have been weirdly silent on this topic. So much so that weirdo Reddit bros started to theorize that there would be no sidestep in the game, and then that theory gained so much traction on Twitter that Harada had to come out and confirm that sidesteps are in fact in the game. They did finally showcase Nina sidestepping Lars back 4 in her trailer, and then also they showed Kazuya sidestepping Jin's forward 4. The whole silent treatment regarding movement is kind of odd to me because movement is the mechanic that defines the series more than anything else. Movement works completely uniquely in Tekken compared to any other game, and it is the main reason for the level of depth in decision making that can arise out of seemingly simple interactions. If I was making Tekken 8, I would be going out of my way to show people why movement in this game is so fucking cool. Because movement is the thing that makes Tekken, Tekken. I mean, I've made a bunch of tutorials and I host a Tuesday stream for beginners because I want more people to appreciate how cool Tekken is. I'm a little worried though that with so much emphasis on the heat system, they could be moving away from the gameplay that the series is known for. That, to me, would be detrimental to the game as a competitive game because boiled down, RPS heavy, 2D style gameplay just isn't going to work here. And no, I'm not just some 2D hater. I actually play 2D fighting games. But the thing is, Tekken doesn't have all the other stuff that 2D fighters have that makes them cool and interesting. 2D games are full of defensive mechanics and aerial movement and special moves and weird character archetypes. Tekken doesn't have any of that shit. What's unique about Tekken and what makes Tekken cool is how deep these seemingly simple interactions go. We got a taste of RPS-heavy gameplay in a 3D fighting game when Soul Calibur 6 came out, and that game fucking bombed. Competitive longevity, in my opinion, is key to keeping a game alive and a big part of what drives sales 2, 3, and 4 years into the life of a game. People watch Combo Breaker, Evo, or Tekken World Tour Finals, and they see how cool Knee and Arslan Ash look playing this game, and they go buy it. That's literally how I got into playing Tekken. If you want an active and healthy competitive scene, then the gameplay has to stay open-ended and expressive. If every round of Tekken turns into FADC cancel rock, paper, scissors for the win, most people will ultimately decide to play something else, especially with Capcom putting up a $2 million prize pool for their Pro Tour. I mean, that's a whole nother fucking video. But Harada, if you're watching this, trust me, you can't afford to fuck this up. Now, the good news is there's a lot of stuff and sort of hints in the other mechanics of Tekken 8 that make me think that they're not gonna fuck this up. This brings us to the Kazuya trailer. Now, in the Kazuya trailer, we see a lot of new stuff. I'm not going to cover everything in there because the trailer came out literally while I was making this video. But one interaction that I just cannot pass up talking about is when Kazuya does his heat dash cancel on Jin and then follows up with this new move, which is a parry. It looks very similar to Jin's parry or any of the Power Crush parries from Tekken 7, where he absorbs a hit from Jin, in this case a forward 4, and then gets a wall splat. Now, the reason that this particular interaction is something that I need to talk about here is I was actually able to test this in Tekken 7 using Zafina's Rage Drive. And Zafina's Rage Drive, if you don't know, it's plus 19. It's actually so plus that you cannot be counter hit afterwards for mashing unless Zafina does a really slow move or manually delays her timing. You also cannot low parry afterwards as the defender. It's super plus. It's like the kind of
overwhelming advantage
that a lot of the competitive players, myself included, were assuming that heat dash cancels would be. However, if you do the same sequence in Tekken 7 after Zafina's Rage Drive, she's 2+ to do a parry here. Her parry just whiffs, and then Jin forward 4s her in the face. So the fact that Jin's forward 4 actually triggers this parry means that you can't be +19 here. It's going to be something lower than that. Now, I don't know the exact frame data. I don't think that even through counting the frames of the video, we could quite tell based on the recovery animation, but it's definitely in time to be able to press a button, which means that defensive options similar to the situation with Leo's stance cancel could be very viable here. We don't know for sure, but this is a very strong and clear indication that at least we know it's not going to be +20. It's going to be less than that, and I think that bodes well for the game. One of the more controversial mechanics that they've added in Tekken 8 is chip damage. Now, if you're not someone who plays 2D fighting games, chip damage is the term for damage that you take while blocking attacks. To be fair, chip is actually already in Tekken 7, but only if you key charge first, so it's more or less useless, unless of course you're a scumbag like me. Now, in order to understand how chip damage will actually work in Tekken 7, we first need to understand the recoverable gauge. Aerial combo damage, damage absorbed via armored power crush attacks, and any chip damage you take will be registered as white health on your health bar that you can recover by attacking the opponent. If you've ever played the FromSoft game Bloodborne, it seems like the recoverable health mechanic will function fairly similar to that. Basically, as long as your attacks aren't whiffing, you gain health back. So how do you actually take chip damage? Well, so far they've shown two main ways. One, any move you block while your opponent is in heat mode will do chip damage. And two, specific hard-hitting moves will do chip damage even when you're not in heat mode. So chip damage in Tekken 8, at least what's been shown so far, appears to be situationally dependent. It's important to note you can't die from chip damage, so popping heat to chip someone out for a cheesy win will not be a strategy we see in Tekken 8, which is probably for the best. Initially, I found the addition of chip damage to be kind of unnecessary and annoying because you can already do damage to someone who's blocking by just doing a low. In Tekken, low pokes pretty much fulfill the role that chip damage does in 2D games. Tekken also has straight up unblockables, so now why do we have moves you can block but they do damage too? What do we gain here? I guess they just don't really want you to be able to block forever, but like unless your name is Ni or Arslan, then you probably don't have the defense to do that anyway, and for that reason, I think chip damage will be fine, honestly. I don't see it being a huge disruptor or causing huge problems, but I know all the old school players are going to hate it just on principle. I think there's a little more to bite off talking about the recoverable gauge. The ability to recover some health seems like it's yet another way to offset the longer combos that will be possible with heat. It's also worth noting that recoverable health was in the tag games, though it worked a little differently there, but this idea isn't completely new to the series. One important aspect about how recoverable health is functioning right now is that lows will reduce the recoverable gauge considerably. Paul's down 3 did way more damage to the white health than it did to the normal health gauge. This means that poking, and by extension, characters with good pokes, will likely be a viable strategy in Tekken 8. For one, unlike juggle damage, poke damage is grounded, and therefore your opponent won't gain white health on the recoverable gauge when you do poke damage to them. Meanwhile, since poking entails doing lots of small attacks to kill your opponent, poke-heavy characters will be recovering health from their own recoverable gauge by pressing lots of jabs and downform 1s and the like. And lastly, poking characters also tend to have more damaging or advantageous low pokes that are kind of designed to snowball momentum over time. Now that we know these lows will be doing big damage to the recoverable gauge, this also means it can be difficult to come back against poke-heavy characters. One example of this is Jack. He has down forward 2 to launch you, and then he can maul your ankles with repeated down-back 1s to disintegrate your recoverable gauge. I mean, good luck coming back against a good Jack player, but that's kind of the point. That's Jack's identity in the series. Personally, I think it's a good sign that the developers have gone out of their way to prioritize poking and Tekken-style neutral, and they've also taken some clear steps to prevent Tekken 8 from turning into a degenerate touch-of-death combo game. Tekken 8, for better or worse, is going in a direction. From the heat system to chip damage to recovering lost health through attacking, there is a clear thematic focus on aggression. I think as long as defensive playstyles are viable and the gameplay remains open-ended and deep, then this thematic focus could be a good thing that helps the game feel more consistent and realized. My reservations about the game hinge on the heat system. Is Heat mortgaging some of the series' core identity to make the gameplay more like 2D fighting games, or is it trying to package Tekken gameplay into something that casual players will find more familiar? I already spoke in depth about why the first point could be bad for the game, but what if the latter is true? Street Fighter V launched in 2016 to massive anticipation. It would go down as one of the most disastrous launches in the history of fighting games, and the various controversies that marred its early success are well documented elsewhere. Looking back, it seems pretty clear that it just launched too early, but the resulting effect was that a lot of players interested in fighting games were looking for something else to play. This particular moment of fighting games zeitgeist allowed Harada and his team to sort of catch lightning in a bottle, and that really helped propel the early sales of Tekken 7 to their eventual over 10 million number that Harada likes to tout. Now, Capcom is not going to drop the ball on another Street Fighter launch. You can't catch lightning in a bottle twice. However, I suspect that Harada, being the business-savvy games industry guy he is, might see other lightning bolts on the horizon. In 1998, I somehow convinced my dad to put up a $50 deposit to rent a PlayStation 1 from Blockbuster Video. I already had a Nintendo 64, and as an unemployed 12-year-old, there was no chance of me saving up the money for a PlayStation. Now, when you rented a console from Blockbuster Video in 1998, you got to pick 3 games to take home with you. My top 3 picks were Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII, and Tekken 3. Except they didn't have Final Fantasy in, so I got Star Ocean instead and didn't really play a lot of Star Ocean. But for those 3 days, I played the absolute shit out of Tekken 3 and Metal Gear Solid. I actually unlocked every single character in Tekken 3 in a single sitting because Blockbuster Video did not provide you with a memory card when you rented a console. I mean, what the hell, Blockbuster? No wonder you guys went out of business. My memory of sitting on my parents' bed because the TV in their room was the only one that had the correct hookups for the PS1 and playing Tekken 3 is one of my most vivid formative memories from this part of my life. I think playing Tekken 3 that weekend is a big part of why I play Tekken competitively 25 years later and why I'm bothering to even make this video. If you grew up in the 90s or the early 2000s, then you might have a similar story. When it came out, Tekken 3 was the reason to buy a PlayStation. The world had just never seen anything like it. The animations, the sound design, the clothing, just everything. This game is iconic. It defined and influenced a generation of not just fighting games, but video games. While the series never quite reached this height of influence again, Tekken remained culturally relevant all throughout the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 eras. I know so many people who play like Gran Turismo, Tekken, and sports games, or people who grew up with a 360 and play COD, Madden, and Tekken 6. There are a lot of people who like these kinds of games, or who just play Tekken that don't necessarily play other video games. So why am I talking about all this? Well, at one point during the developers Tekken World Tour presentation, they were talking about simple controls, and they said something interesting about how simple controls will be familiar to anyone who plays action games. This lit a light bulb in my head because all of a sudden I was thinking about me on my parents' bed playing Tekken 3 and Metal Gear, and how Tekken used to be a series that felt familiar to anyone who played video games. But then as the games industry evolved, Tekken's controls became a little archaic and weird. A lot of people say the game feels kind of stiff who try it nowadays. The developers said they want Tekken 8 to be easier to watch for spectators and more satisfying to press the attack in. Initially, these comments made no sense to me because I think Tekken 7 already does those things better than most fighting games. Casual viewers aren't gonna understand the game better if there's a bunch of meter crap to keep track of. But for someone who plays games like God of War, Dark Souls, Yakuza, the heat system is going to make perfect sense. I think that Harada wants people who play the contemporary single-player action games who aren't currently playing Tekken to become Tekken players. Just like how in earlier console generations, players who liked the genres that were popular at that time also played Tekken. And the key to doing this is the heat system. The heat system could essentially be a tool to teach players who like action games how to play Tekken. And if that's the case, then I think this game is going to sell like hotcakes, and I think it will have a very healthy competitive scene. Harada and his team are essentially swinging for the fences here and taking a huge risk. And I've identified a bunch of potential pitfalls to this approach where it could totally blow up in their faces. But I'm also not sure that Tekken 8 could afford not to take a risk. The fact that we're seeing another installment in the series at all is not a foregone conclusion. Just look at Virtua Fighter, DOA, any Capcom fighting game not named Street Fighter. So many classic fighting games and arcade series have simply gone the way of the ghost. It's kind of crazy to think that a niche arcade martial arts simulator is somehow more popular than ever almost 3 decades after its original release. I don't know if Tekken 8 will be a great game or not, but it definitely has the potential to be one. Somewhere in the world, I like to think that there's a 12-year-old sitting on their parents' bed spamming Julia's Party Crasher against the AI, trying to collect unlockables. And ultimately, I think their opinion will matter more than mine. I'm Keith B. And as always, thank you for watching.